This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. For a free 10-day unlimited trial, visit lynda.com/MacVoices. MacVoices is in San Francisco for WWDC and AltConf. I'm here with Mike Lee of AltConf to talk about what his role is this year, and I think it's probably the same as last year, Mike.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm doing the safety and diversity stuff for the conference, and then just sort of floating around as coordinator at large.
I like that, and I like the title, coordinator at large. Okay, so first let's talk about safety. I haven't seen any safety issues here. Everybody seems pretty well behaved.
Yeah, the safety has been really well taken care of. We have a very strong anti-harassment policy, and we're here in the Metreon Theater, which already has a lot of security. They have their own code of conduct and everything. So the safety, we're not really worried that much. The bigger part of my job really has been trying to build the diversity of the conference, especially through the speakers that we selected. Obviously we had a community selection process, but we also put forth a lot of effort to actually get a very diverse number of speakers. Last year, obviously, I concentrated on getting as many women to speak as possible. Brought Brianna Wu on board. I'm very happy to see her back. I just came from her talk. I might still be a little emotional from it. This year I was really concentrating on trying to get more trans voices onto our stage. Dr. Corey Ziegler is joining us. I'm very pleased to hear about some of these issues, and I'm hoping that I can press this even further. I've seen some really amazing conferences that have had what I might call a user representative get up on stage, people who are sight impaired or people who have children with autism and something like that, and talk about how they use technology. I'm personally fascinated by the question of how are amputees using technology, because in this country, because of our military excursions, we have a lot of amputees, and with this stuff on touch devices, like how are they using their screens, for example, right? So that's been my major role in the conference.
We had part of this conversation before the camera started. I'm definitely noticing more of a female presence here, and I think it's great because it seems to be, that part seems to be less of an issue than it was last year. We've seen some changes in the industry, I think, over the last year, hopefully, and that's improving. It's still got a long way to go, but it's definitely improving. The trans aspect is interesting to me because I'm not sure how I feel about having someone here as a speaker just because of that. Just that in my mind wouldn't necessarily qualify them. It's more about their chops, about what they know how to do. Am I being unreasonable with that?
Well, I think you could definitely say the same thing about women as speakers, right? Like, they should be here for their chops, and all the women who are here for their chops. Really what it comes down to is that what was noticed was that mathematically the number of women on stage speaking of technology were not matching the number of women who are actually producing technology. Just like the number of women who are producing technology does not match the number of women who are in the world, right? So this is the disparity that we're looking for. I've been doing this hardcore for 10 years now, right? I've worked at Apple. I've been to 10 of these conferences. I've been on campus. I've been in a lot of other things. I have noticed it seems like there are a lot more trans people in our industry than in the population in general, and yet I never see trans people on stage. And so, to me, the trans community feels underrepresented. Not only that, but the reason why it's such a thing for me personally, women in tech is a huge issue, and everyone knows this. Everyone is working on this problem. Not so many people are working on trans people in tech. Not so many people are working on, the racial balance in tech, right? Like, I was at a conference recently where they put up a slide of all the speakers, and half of them are women, and it was like, wow, look at the amazing diversity. They're all white, right? They're all white. They're all cisgendered. I know that trans people hate it when we just call people cisgendered, but just to make that distinction, we need to think about diversity in a much wider way. And trans people are typically, in their history, not just in technology, but then in their history as a group, they're underrepresented. They've been betrayed. They were part of the homosexual movement, but the homosexual movement became very straight, if you'll pardon the expression, in order to normalize their position in society, and they've been very successful. But historically, trans people suffered in that. right? A lot of people don't know that part because it's not nice to talk about how the people pulled themselves up but then screwed somebody else in the process, right? So me personally, because of my own history of growing up mixed race and not really fitting in anywhere, when I see somebody who is not fitting in, that upsets me, and when I see that trans people are not, they're getting the short end of the stick, then I want to step in on that. That becomes a personal issue for me, right? Like, I have some trans friends. I think that everyone in the industry has some trans friends, but that's not really the point, right? The point is, like, this is a group that's obviously persecuted, that is not being represented, is not represented in conferences the way that they're represented in our industry. Somebody has to do something about that, and somebody is my middle name.
You clearly feel strongly about it, and I think it's interesting that you are willing to put yourself out there as much as you are about this issue, and that it translates so well into AltConf that they've identified one area and they've tried to help improve that. Now maybe you're identifying some other areas and you're trying to help improve that without diluting the purpose of the conference itself.
Well, yeah, and this conference is it's something that's really by the community for the community, and so what the community cares about, by default, AltConference cares about. I see the purpose of AltConference as being, more than anything, what goes on across the street at Moscone. Even though it's a relatively small conference, the impact on the world is enormous. What happens on the record across the street impacts the world. I'm concerned about the world. This stage, this seventh stage, if you will, is the ability to add things to that record that are relevant to this group of people, but that are not necessarily about a recent Apple technology. There's so much more that we have to think about in order to do our job effectively, other than just the API stacks, right? Things like Metal are great, but that's only half of it, right? The human part of it is a big part of it. Like, they're not going to talk about Gamergate over there, but Gamergate affects how we do our jobs, right? They're not going to talk about equality issues over there, but that really affects our jobs, right? So I would say half of the stuff in our industry that needs to be talked about doesn't qualify to be on a stage over there. I'd say 90% of the speakers that people are interested in hearing from, they don't work at Apple, therefore they don't qualify to be on that stage over there. So it's really important that there be some stage that's not about Apple tech, that's not by Apple employees, but that affects the way that technology happens on the Apple platform, because the Apple platform is so important.
And I don't think, it's not ego to say it. I mean, if you watch the videos that they showed at the keynote for WWDC, this whole situation really does change the world. It really affects how the world works, how we all not only do our jobs here, but how we do our jobs everywhere else. And the effect that Apple and technology, Apple specifically and technology in general, have had over the past 15 or 20 years is staggering. And so I think it's probably very appropriate that some of these issues are examined here. They probably aren't going to be solved here. They're pretty big issues, but at least they're examined and maybe brought to the forefront.
Well, planet scale changes are usually not wreaked by massive shifts. Planet scale changes are typically caused by very small shifts, which happen over a geological period of time. So yes, it's probably not that today we're going to do something and tomorrow everything's going to be different, but we shift our attitudes. We shift the way that we interact with the world in subtle ways, and over the course of just a few years, we start to see change, right? You start to see, for example, the gender balance in this conference and other conferences and in our community as a whole start to shift to where it's supposed to be, right? And that wasn't because of one big thing. That was because of just a bunch of little changes, most of which happened in the minds of people who, considered themselves to already be, pretty nice people, but then got challenged on something, made a tiny shift that maybe was even imperceptible to them, and then over time, things managed to change. The other thing that we don't tend to realize, we think of ourselves as like, I just like to sit in front of the computer and make it do things, and if somebody's willing to pay me for that, then that's really cool. How am I, as a person writing apps, going to influence the world, right? It's kind of a silly thing to say. But the metaphor that I like to use is the metaphor of how a cell works in your body, right? It's a big bag of chemicals, and those chemicals react in various random ways. But your DNA encodes for various enzymes, and depending on which enzyme is produced, that acts as a catalyst for this or that reaction, accelerating it. And depending on which reactions are accelerated, the cell will be a blood cell or a nerve cell or a muscle cell or something completely different. Well, what we do accelerates every job in the world. We are the enzyme producers of the cell that is planet Earth. So the jobs that we choose to accelerate, the people who we choose to make apps for, is going to change what kind of planet this is. We have as much effect on this planet as your DNA system has on your cells, which is to say, all of it.
We could go on for hours, and I'd love to. We'll have to do this in a little more controlled setting, because I know you've got things to do here. You can't just stand here in the storage area and talk to me. What are like 2 or 3 questions you would leave people with to help them think a little more broadly and diversely about this? Because I think there are issues that, I was using the example earlier, you know, the stove breaks at home, or the plumbing starts to leak, and you get locked into your own little world, and you never escape back out. That's one of the great things about coming to these conferences, is that it pulls your perspective back and twists it and changes it. What would you tell people to think about going away from this?
I think the first thing that you should be thinking about is, what can I do to help? Right? Because I think that what tends to happen is we analyze a problem and we come to a conclusion that they need to change, whoever they are. Right? This is their fault. Or, education's the problem, government's the problem, Apple's the problem, somebody else is the problem. But we can't control for somebody else. We can only control for ourselves. So you have to ask the question, what can I do to help? Maybe it's a very small thing. Maybe it's just a shifting of your attitude, right? Setting your mind to something just puts into series a focus shift which changes your whole world. It's the way that you hear a word for the first time and you start hearing it everywhere, because there are so many words, you don't notice 99.9% of them. But once you have a new one, you notice it everywhere. If I decide, like I did last year, I want to spend my time repairing the planet, all of a sudden, by sheer coincidence, I meet all these people and have all these conversations, right? And it's like I can get religious about it, but really it's just that my attention has shifted. So just shifting that question to, what can I do, right? You have to ask yourself, is what I am doing, is it making things better? And it's not just a question of, is it making it better or making it worse, because I think most things end up being neutral. And something that's neutral is making it worse. And the reason for that is entropy, right? It's like we're on a moving sidewalk that's always moving us backwards, and we have to actually be moving forward just to stay where we are. And so if what you're doing is not actively making things better, then maybe think about doing something else. And I mean, the other thing is not so much a question, but just like a basic attitude, right? I've tried to inject this into my own life. When somebody does something that just infuriates me, and I want to say, like, what the is this person thinking, right? Instead, what I try to say is, boy, we've all been there.
Well, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with what was that person thinking if you take that sentence literally. Yeah. If you try to figure out where are they coming from and why do they think like that, because maybe I can understand them, not agree with them, but understand them, and then, shift my thinking or approach them and shift their thinking.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, like with the racial and gender stuff, for example, right? I've had women come to me and say, I don't understand why black people are so upset. On the same day that I've had black people come to me and say, I don't understand why women are so upset, right? And to them, it's like, okay, you're a woman, right? The things that you experience, black people experience it except about race. So when people talk about race, and it's not just black people, anybody who's talking about race, right? Then transpose that to being a woman, right? And vice versa, right? I don't understand why she's so upset. Okay, well, what if it wasn't about feminine issues? What if it was about racial issues? Oh, well, then I'd be upset. It's like, exactly, right? So I think that, we really can come together. We really can understand each other. That's what conferences are amazing at, because when we're in person, we really see that we really do have common ground. And just like you said, if you can ask what was that person thinking and mean it, what was that person feeling and why, and understanding that we all have the same sort of toolbox that we're working with, and we're just trying to make our way through all of this despite the broken stovepipes and the need to make dinner, I really think that we can affect change.
We will continue this discussion at some point. I really appreciate the time, Mike.
I always love talking to you.
So where do we send people to find out everything else about you and what you do when you're not here expanding our minds?
Well, I think that right now what you should probably do is go watch my UIConf talk, which is on YouTube, and then watch my AltConf talk, which I'm going to give on Friday, which will hopefully also be on YouTube, because those two together, one is mathematical proof of what I'm saying, and the other is what we can do about it.
And folks, I'll try to have those in the show notes, at the very least the first one and the second one as soon as it becomes available. So that way they can see a little bit more about what else you have to say.
Yeah, even watch the live stream.
There you go. Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Folks, more from AltConf and WWDC in San Francisco. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.